too long? Do you acknowledge that maybe some of the tariffs or some of the uncertainty engendered by the China trade war affected GDP?
Well, it'll be higher than 2%. A lot of people are very thrilled with that. Me, I'm not, but we had a lot of bad things happen. Number one, the Fed was not good, as far as I'm concerned, and that was a big blip that should not have taken place. It should not have happened. Had we not done the big raise on interest, I think we would have been close to 4, and I could see 5,000 to 10,000 points more on the Dow. But that was a killer when they raised the rate. It was just a big mistake, and they admit to it. They admit to it. I was right. I don't want to be right, but I was right.
All right, so that was President Trump blaming the Fed for a slowing U.S. economy in an interview earlier with CNBC in Davos, Switzerland. CNBC's Willem Marx joins us live from London. He's been following down all the other big business stories of the day. Let's pick up on that point, Willem, really quickly. President Trump spoke to CNBC about his tariff threat on European cars. What more do you have on that?
Been a perennial fear amongst European companies and investors, actually, Eamon. But, you know, he was speaking to my colleague Joe Kernan, saying that Europe has been tough to deal with. He had a meeting this week with Ursula von der Leyen. She's the new Commission president, so she's in charge of the EU's executive branch. Her predecessor, Jean-Claude Juncker, had actually signed a sort of trade truce, if you will, in the summer of 2018 with President Trump. Since then, there's not been a huge amount of movement on issues of actual substance. We've had the US initiate retaliatory tariffs on Italian cheese, on French wine, on Spanish olives. But actually, when it comes down to the details of how they want to arrange trade in the future, there's not been a huge amount of movement. What European companies, global investors really are concerned about is this idea that German manufacturers, French manufacturers of cars would face tariffs going to the US. It's a big market for them. That could be very, very damaging. And the French actually have their own very direct spat with the US on trade, which seems to have been just this week slightly resolved. Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, meeting with President Trump. They seem to have agreed that they will not start installation of a digital tax on big tech companies. The US have said that this digital tax the French have proposed would unfairly target big American tech firms. The French dispute that, but they said they will postpone throughout the course of this year the installments on that digital tax. Don't forget, the US had threatened to retaliate with tariffs on French goods, champagne, handbags. So this does seem to be slightly winding down, although I would say the French finance minister just giving an interview a few minutes ago saying they're not going to take it off the table entirely, and that's right out of the Trump administration playbook of holding on to the threat of tariffs to maintain leverage.
All right, Willem Marx live in London for us.
Willem.
Appreciate it.
Great talking to you. Up next, a look at Axios' One Big Thing, and coming up on Morning Joe, more from yesterday's marathon impeachment trial in the Senate.
Plus, former Vice President, 2020 presidential candidate Joe Biden will be our guest. Morning Joe, everyone, just moments away.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.